It's like just such an eclectic mix of architecture. But then within an hour's drive, you can be at skiing in the mountains if you want to, or you can go to the coast. There's just, it's such a beautiful place. So this is just a day trip we took from Vancouver. On the right there, we're still fairly cheerful because we hadn't actually been stuck in the gondola yet at that point. We were actually, to be fair, we were only stuck in the gondola for like 1 minute, but previously we were stuck on top of the mountain because someone else was stuck in the gondola for like an hour. So we kind of were leery getting back on, and then when it stopped on the way back down, that was a bit much, but amazing scenery, views just immediately out the coastal mountains that run through Washington and up through the west coast of Canada. Just very dramatic landscape. I show you this not just because they're pretty pictures, but because they do, I think, getting a sense of the place in looking at the art are important. This is a place called Butch Art Gardens on the Vancouver Island, where Victoria, the capital of British Columbia, is. And then after all those, in retrospect, I should have done the cities in opposite order because it's kind of tough to take someone to this place and then go to Montreal where it's snowing on spring break. But we finished our trip in Montreal. I don't have as many pictures from Montreal because it was really cold. So we were usually like rushing to get into the museums and such. But anyway, so to the art. Obviously, just like anywhere else, just like, if I was to try to spend a few minutes to tell you about American art, there's no logical start and stop to that, right? You just have to make some choices. And that's just as true with Canada as it is anywhere else. But there are these few ubiquitous artists in Canada that are kind of always brought up, and they're the sort of national treasures. The artists, they're the Canadian like Norman Rockwell or something, where even people who are not especially interested in art, probably have wall calendars and things like are aware of these artists. But unlike a lot of places, these artists in Canada are specifically tuned into sort of the rugged landscape, and I think that's interesting. I think that, and that's where I'm gonna make a connection to some Norwegian artists soon, where there's something about landscape painting that is often tied to this idea of kind of a national pride. Often, and I think think about like America the Beautiful, right? It's this like all this mention of all these different parts of our landscape. So there's something about the land that's important to our understanding of our place. And in Canada, the sort of European perspective is that of this kind of rugged, untamed wilderness, which obviously Canada and the U.S. have a very similar history in terms of kind of settlers thinking of a place as unoccupied when it's clearly not unoccupied. But that's the sort of national story of Canadian art in the 20th century and up to today. Tom Thompson was a particularly well-known Canadian artist. You'd see his work everywhere. But again, it's not most of the time you see the sort of big, beautiful landscape paintings of these vast mountains and some of the kind of like the photographs I was showing you earlier. That's kind of the more common way of this sort of like romantic kind of nationalist artwork. But Canadian artists, often there's some of that, but often it's this more rugged. It's more kind of closed in. It's more likely to have trees in the extreme foreground. It's more likely to have dead trees. It's more likely to have landscapes that seem sort of harsh and difficult, as opposed to this kind of bird's eye view of this big, just vast spaces. So another of his. Also, much like Scandinavian artists that I'm very interested in, there's a strong emphasis on kind of unique light. When you go far enough north, you start to see light in a different way. Days are longer and shorter to the extreme. One thing, I don't know if you've ever been anywhere where there's very, very long days in the summer. The sunsets are elongated as well. So there's this sort of like extra color in the sky. So I'll show you some, here in a minute, I'll show you some Norwegian painters that I think there's a lot of kind of commonality, and they're both, they're a similar latitude. And again, even these vast spaces, this is a little bit more open of a space, but it's still, the emphasis is on this rushing water, right? There's also almost no sky. And I think that's something, as a viewer, when you look at artwork, think about, I like to tell students, think about who you are in relation to the space that you're looking at. And when you're in a landscape, but you barely see any sky, it makes you sort of enclosed, right? It sort of puts you into it, down on the ground. And that's something you see a lot of among these artists. MacDonald and a couple of the others that we'll look at are part of a group of Canadian landscape painters called the Group of Seven. Thompson is not, just because he died very young, actually, drowned in a canoe accident on one of his painting excursions. But the Group of Seven is anything you read about them, they refer to as sort of symbolizing the national pride of Canada. Like, to this day, it's still very much the, it's like the quintessential Canadian sort of images. But it's all about this kind of romanticized, man versus nature sort of thing. But it is in this tradition of a lot of landscape painters where throughout history, where there's this kind of almost like adventure quality to it. Like, it's not just painting in a studio, it's actually kind of going out and exploring. And, granted, photography was an option by this point, but it's still got this, it has this spirit of like kind of bringing back knowledge to the cities about how this vast space around. Emily Carr is a West Coast Canadian painter. She's really interesting too. She's one of the most, certainly the most famous female Canadian artist of this time period, and was actually pretty well known throughout Europe and the U.S. as well. There's actually the big art school on the West Coast is Emily Carr University now. But she grew up in British Columbia, and she, similar to the Group of Seven, was interested in exploring the landscape and kind of this sort of romantic idea. But one thing that's interesting about her is she also was one of the only of these artists to actually try to explore some of the First Nations that were in the area. So just like in the U.S., we have this story of this kind of national story of, came over to this place and it was empty and we tore across it and civilized it. And that's very much the Canadian story as well. So Emily Carr was a little bit interested in, there's still if you read her writing and you look at the work that she makes, there's still a sort of chauvinism to it. There's still this idea of, kind of, I don't know, that the European perspective is still the primary correct one, but that there's this sort of pathos. But she sort of views the First Nations cultures on the West Coast as sort of dying out, and she thinks of her work as kind of documenting. She's trying to preserve them, that legacy before she before it's gone, is her idea. So she would go spend months at a time in some of these communities. She had a lot of paintings that of lots of like the totem poles and like ritual and stuff like that. And she's, from it's interesting because if you go to the museums, they don't know how to treat her, because in some sense, there's this sort of like dual, like celebration, but also apology almost, because from current perspective, a lot of her work feels a little bit like exploitative in a way, but in the context of her time, she would have been considered rather forward thinking. So it's interesting to see. Just a few others from this group, just to give you a sense. Notice some of these, when you see these paintings, another thing I like to remind students when you're looking at artwork on a screen is, first of all, go see it in person as soon as you can. But when you're looking at it on a screen, pay attention to the size of it, because that's always an important thing. Because this, if you look at this, 8.5 inches, so this painting is this big. A lot of these paintings, when you see them that are this big and when they're made in this way, like this was almost definitely, I don't know this for certain, but just my professional opinion, is that it was painted on site, right? It was painted out in the snow. And so that again kind of gets to this idea of this work. It's trying to make you feel the like rugged landscape. It's not supposed to just be pretty pictures. And again, there's no sky, right? It's very much this closed in. You're there. It's not something that previous generations of artists would have designed as a picturesque landscape. Similarly, here we have a little more open space, different kind of more abstract style, but it's the primary subjects are these kind of gnarled and dead trees, right? These trees that are worn by the conditions that they're in. Going to Norway, just for some comparison, we do have some artists like Hans Fredrik Gude who are he was sort of the teacher of a lot of these other people we'll look at. But Gude is and a lot of these other Norwegian artists, they're in Norway at a time when it's very much sort of an out of the way place, right? It's sort of spent most of its recent history being kicked back and forth as, a sort of lesser partner of Denmark or a lesser partner of Sweden. And so a lot of these artists from the 19th century in Norway, just like the Canadians, they don't just view their work as making pretty pictures. They think they are explaining their place to the world. They're going, and they're very much going out into it and bringing back sort of documentary. So Norway has a very rugged, long coastline, and they spend, a lot of these artists will go into the mountains. So again, August Kaplan, who has become one of my favorite artists, and then he died at the age of 25, which makes me wonder what on earth he would have done. But again, there's this emphasis on some of the harshness of nature, right? It's not just this perfectly intact, pristine nature, but it's these trees that are dying and worn. Study of a decaying wood, right? And there's no out, like it's dark, enclosed space. Some of his more kind of major works, I guess you could say, still focus largely on these forests that seem like kind of in a constant state of replication. Another just example, a tree as a hero, right? A tree standing up to the storm. In America, many of our artists who we associate with this same kind of national romanticism, they approach it a little differently. There's more of a picturesque kind of vast space. So Bierstadt, there's still this drama though, right? It's still about it's not just all peace, right? There's this storm rolling in. So there's this idea of danger and of conquering the landscape. If you go to, so Bierstadt was another one of these artists who he grew up in, or lived in, okay, he might have grown up in Germany actually, but he lived in the Northeast, but he would travel with like mining companies and such that were traveling across the land as a way of going to see it and paint it. So he painted the Rocky Mountains. If you go to Rocky Mountain National Park, there's a Bierstadt Lake named after him. Also, photographers were similarly showing the land as a way of building pride. Watkins, in particular, was an artist who he photographed Yosemite before Yosemite was, long before there was a National Park Service. He actually he did a series of photos of Yosemite that are made their way to Washington, and are said to be and actually cited, I believe, by Abraham Lincoln as a kind of inspiration for starting the first steps of legislation that eventually would become the National Park Service years and years later. So this idea, so it's not just that. I think landscape painting and landscape art in general can sometimes be thought of as being maybe somewhat decorative, but I think that a lot of times there is more of a point to it. There is more of a kind of thrust of a message, or at least it serves that purpose in a lot of cases. Now to what we've done about it. So our group traveled. Like I said, we saw the art of Canada. We saw a lot of these Group of Seven and Tom Thompson artworks in person, as well as lots and lots of others. But then when we came back, we made our own work, sort of in response to our trip. So the photos I'm going to show you shortly some are better than others as far as the quality of the photo itself. And that's because of me, and that I didn't photograph a lot of these works before they were put under glass. So some of the photos are not that great, but good news, you get to go to the gallery anytime you want. They're today or tomorrow or next week up until Wednesday, and go see them in person. So really the point of showing you this work now and talking about it is to get you to go back and re-experience, or experience for the first time, the exhibition. Tjorn designed our poster as well as making work for the show. You can see the 28th is the end of the show, so that's, I believe, Wednesday of next week. And it's too late for the reception, and you're at the artist talk. So this is one of the photos where, unfortunately, you see my reflection in the glass. Taking a photo of a photo under glass. Go see it in person, though. So as I mentioned earlier, I was hoping that the students would be here to talk about their own work, but they have various reasons for not being here, various courses they have to, jobs, I don't know, whatever. So I'll be speaking on their behalf as well as I can. But I just tell you a little bit about their experience and what I know of what they were doing. Abby Serbrug is she's an education major here and an honor student, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. She took a lot of photographs on the trip, and she was very interested in capturing sort of a range of things. But a lot of it focuses sort of just on like street culture and just, out on the town. Because the cities are, Vancouver in particular is an interestingly felt very, very clean and modern by, compared to most cities that I'm accustomed to, but it was very vibrant. And it's also, Vancouver's one of the, I want to say, this is not well researched, so this is a suggestion for you to research this to get a real answer, but it's something like maybe the only city of its size or close to that is actually has no, it's majority minority in that there is no single ethnicity that has anywhere near 50% of the population. So it's like we talk about melting pot, but Vancouver is just any street in Vancouver, you will see people from all over the world. It's really interesting. Um, and then Montreal is also Montreal is quite a bit different in that regard. Although still, it's a big city with a lot of diversity, but it feels very much like a European city to me. Again, this is my bad photo of her good photo, so you should go see it in person. And then she also, one thing we did along the way, we kept little watercolor kits with us, and we painted throughout the trip. Um, those were, and I promised them from the beginning because a lot of them had not painted before, so they were a little nervous about this idea that I was making them paint while traveling, and then that we were going to have an exhibition. I promised them from the beginning they got to pick what went in the exhibition. Um, but Abby did make this sort of as a response to one of the museums we visited. When we were in Montreal, we visited, there's all throughout Canada, they are very much in a national discussion about kind of reconciliation with the past and treatment of Indigenous people, and also trying to kind of just move forward, I guess, from that. And so there are lots of art centers around the country that are devoted to Indigenous artists from the regions. Like there's several First Nations groups historically from around Montreal. And a lot of those artists from those communities will show in the cities. In this place we went, the Sacred Fire Productions cultural space, we saw really powerful work that involved these, or they were dresses, I guess. This arrangement of dresses that was both using traditional techniques and symbolism, but also addressing ongoing issues. So that's she's addressing that here. M. Nicholas, also an education major, was on the trip. She was really struck by how active this sort of protest culture in Vancouver was. Just when we were there, we witnessed a lot. There were a lot of protests about the situation in Gaza. There were, stickers everywhere. Like there were these kind of homemade stickers on every surface that you'd see. Just about, it seemed like, on a range of topics. So she actually would photograph the stickers, and then when she got back, sort of printed out her own sticker pages of them, and then used that as collage material to sort of make a sticker mural directly on the wall. So if you get a chance, it's interesting to look at this. When you go over there, look at it up close. It's not necessarily like one person's point of view. It's very much this kind of slice of various sorts of protests. But she's arranged this, and on the right there's a detail image kind of showing you the way it's made and the stickers. Another not bad photo of a good artwork. Sorry. I don't know, it's all me, right? So I'm just showing you a bunch of pictures of me reflected in artworks. This is Joy Houston. She's one of our art majors who is actually graduating this year. So in addition to going to see this show, make sure and come back late after Thanksgiving, I think, to see her senior exhibit. she really kind of stretched away from her kind of normal work, I think, for this. She wanted to kind of capture the sense of experiencing new places and the travel. So she made a lot of much looser works than she normally does. Working on paper, which is different for her. It's very, you actually see some of the rough edges in the work. You see the yarn attached to the outside is this kind of like extra layer, so it sort of breaks the kind of formality of a picture within a frame. So I was really, there's I think there's 8 or 9 of these in the show, so of different varieties. So they really, especially I think for the people who went on the trip, it's like a lot of them just really kind of capture some memory. There's one I don't think I put in here, but there's one called Tubing that has this big mountain path in the snow, and that was from one of our day trips from Vancouver, where again it was like 65 or 70 degrees in Vancouver. We were up in the mountains, and at the top of the place where the gondola went, actually, they had tubing, like snow tubing. So the students all, I felt like I was going to break a leg, but the students all went and went tubing. Was that good? Good time? Montreal, we did a walking tour. There's some local guy that I found on one of the tour sites who seemingly just for a hobby, because it's super cheap, and he was the only person in Canada I saw that refused a tip. So he's apparently not in it for the money. But he gave us this 2-hour walking trip of Mount Royal Park, which is sort of, a lot of Montreal sits on this big slope, and the very top of it is Mount Royal Park, and that was really cool. But this I believe is from here, because it was most of the time if we were in the woods in Montreal, it was probably up there. Is Caleb here? Okay, I was hoping Caleb would be here to explain this. So I haven't heard. I mean, I've read his artist statement. I don't know. It's referencing. It's supposed to visually reference some of the totem poles, but then he's sort of playing on kind of cheap throwaway Western culture and the sort of collision of the two. Hence the pizza boxes and lots of cardboard and tape. There's more of a statement on it, though. If you want to read it, you can head over to the gallery. And then Tjorn. Tjorn's here, so I don't have to just make stuff up about his work. He can come tell you himself.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Tjorn. So I'm a graphic designer at MSSU and also dabble in illustration. So for my work, well, when I was on the trip, I got to view a lot of different native artworks and how they have a certain abstract style to the way they design, and also plays into how they tell stories. So combining my two disciplines, I try to make something that's kind of similar. So in this work called Change, I try to visualize the changing culture and people in Canada. So you can see two different native tribes, and the golden bill is supposed to represent the current culture of Canada. And also you can see some of the national animals. You have Canadian geese, you have some bears, you have some killer whales. But what I want the most is that when someone views the work, they have their own idea of the piece itself. So I hope that when you guys view the work, you have your own different view on it, and it inspires you as well. If you want. Wait, not that one. Oh, okay. So this one is Last Goal. So at the museums in Canada, well, the one in Montreal specifically, it talked about how children and like people were taken from their homes and they were kind of like taught to like abandon their culture, and also talked about like how like different when they would go missing during the time of like colonization, like people will lose their family members. So this piece was to kind of represent that, like, like a lady and her connection to nature, but also like she's somewhere else in both time, space, and in culture. It don't mean to be kind of dark. And also, the red has a specific meaning to Native culture, but I want you guys to research that on your own. But yeah, that's about it.
Tjorn is one of the most traveled people, certainly traveled students in the university, I bet. I mean, I know there are a lot of well-traveled students, but he's he's always up for a trip. He's done the spring trip to Canada. He went to Sweden. Did you? Oh yeah, we went to Germany on that trip too. So he's also from the British Virgin Islands. So even coming here is a trip for him. So and he's also graduating this semester. So come see Tjorn's senior show as well. We're gonna be sad to see him go. Or maybe we'll just keep him around. I don't know. Last is mine. More dead trees. Stanley Park is a interesting place. What time is it? I don't want to keep you too long. I'll be brief. So Stanley Park is a island park right in Vancouver. It's like just a short bridge you can walk across from the main downtown to Stanley Park. And it's bigger than Central Park, I believe they said. Didn't they say Stanley Park was bigger than Central Park? It's an entirely wooded park. Really interesting. But one thing that I found interesting is how much it felt to me like other northern places I've been, obviously around the world. But this, so my work, I'm interested in this idea of landscape, but the landscape that's maybe not just the picturesque, right? I like the idea of sort of a cycle of death and decay and regrowth as part of that. So I'm drawn to, subjects like this. And I'm not going to talk too much more about my work because it's a student show mostly. But anyway, if you have any questions for me or Tjorn, I'll volunteer him to also answer questions. Let me know. Let us know. Okay. Oh, hey, I'm supposed to bring this to you. Sorry. Well, they're also doing it on the internet. Oh, he's got it. Okay. Okay. Thanks, B.
Oh, I was just interested in what you thought of the food.
Oh. The food. So I'm a vegetarian or a pescatarian, I guess. So I'm like some of the signature dishes of Canada weren't really on my menu, but I think if I'm not mistaken, you could get poutine at McDonald's, which is interesting. But I thought the food was good. The one really interesting food experience we did have is we went to an indigenous owned restaurant in Vancouver called Salmon and Bannock that featured these very traditional food with traditional ingredients. And that was really interesting. It wasn't none of the food I had was drastically different from what I've had around, but it's around different parts of the U.S. But it was really, very good. My favorite, I don't know how Canadian it is, but I think I might have eaten the same shrimp po' boy every night I was in Montreal. Might have, because I was pretty sure I wasn't going to have it again each time, But no, I didn't. I don't. What do you think, Tijoran? Did you have any interesting food experiences?
Well, I enjoyed the Sam at the restaurant.
Yeah.
I think the food in Vancouver was really good. Like there was like one street that was just food, just stores of different cultures, different foods there.
Yeah.
And they were all were really good.
Well, and it's such a international city that it has every kind of cuisine there. I didn't. We weren't there long enough, frankly, to do all of the things. But I've heard that the Chinatown in Vancouver is just an amazing place to go, just for food alone. But anything else? Okay.
Since nobody else is, can you tell us just for a second about any of the three-dimensional sculptures or work? Was it any, just like the landscapes didn't have a lot of the sky in them? Is there anything
Well,
different about the 3D?
just like anywhere, there's a huge variety. I picked the kind of signature stuff to show you, but they have just a huge variety. I don't know that I could point to a specific style. Other than there is the kind of totem animals that, whether it's in actual totem poles or various other forms, there's a sort of visual style of rendering some of the salmon and the bear that are very distinct and that carry over in First Nations artworks, carry over across media. You see it in various forms. But other than that, it was just a huge variety, just like anywhere, just is what I would think. I don't know, what is your thought on that?
For the three-dimensional sculptures, well, I know for the totem poles, each nation has a different way of making them. So they have a unique style and colors. You could tell that this totem pole was from this specific region, and this one from was that region. Also, on one of our tours, one of the tour guides, he mentioned that when they trying to pick a tree to carve a totem pole, they wait for the tree to pick them, which was kind of interesting how they let nature choose them before carving the totem pole.
Yeah, we did in Stanley Park, we did a really interesting tour. Again, it was an indigenous owned business that would do these walking tours, and it was not at all what I expected. I was expecting the traditional, the historic walking tour, and he was more just he's well, let's go over here for a while. It was this very loose walk around the park, and he would find plants and explain how those might have traditionally been used, or he would point out things, and he would talk about one thing what was really valuable is he would talk about the sort of indigenous perspective on things like a city park that would have had communities living there and previously, not that long ago actually. I think some of the, what was it? Do you remember? It was some of the last communities were actually pushed out in the name of making a park in as late as the 60s or something. It wasn't.
Yeah,
it
around
wasn't
that
long
time.
ago.
He also gave us tea.
He gave us tea. Yeah, tea made out. He magically pulled this whole tea set out of his backpack and gave everyone some herbal tea. I don't remember the rest of that day. No, just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding, Marcy.
No, it's okay. I got it.
I'm curious from a non-artist perspective, what you saw thousands of images in your mind
Yeah.
throughout this trip. What inspired you specifically here, and in general, what inspired the students to select what they did select?
Do you want to speak for yourself on that, or? I mean, I can. While the mic's on its way down, I can say that I know a couple of the students cited specifically just sort of the natural environment, maybe more so than the artworks they saw. And then I think I know Em and Abby mostly were sort of they were kind of energized by the culture, like just the culture of the cities and the feel of the cities. There was a kind of vibrancy, especially I think in Vancouver, there was just sort of this cultural vibrancy that I think they kind of really fed on, and it kind of wanted to just record mostly. But what about you? You were.
I'm mostly inspired by stories, or just like untold stories about like history and culture. Well, on campus, I also work in African art collection, and I enjoy like learning things about like people, the way they lived, and both the good and bad of the past. So I also want to like share those stories with other people.
So when you were talking about the 8-inch painting, it reminded me of a phrase I often hear about how seeing the paintings physically is usually very different compared to seeing it like on a picture. Oftentimes because you see things like the paint strokes and such. And I wanted to get your opinion on if, not necessarily if it's true, but more like if you felt the difference.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think seeing artwork in person is because I think most, I mean, not all artwork, particularly in today, artists, all bets are off as far as what art is made of and techniques. Some art is made entirely to be experienced digitally at this point. But for the most part, through art history, artworks are made as objects. They're not made as pictures, right? Like a painting is made at a certain size, out of certain materials with certain techniques. It's not, it's not made as a digital file that could be on your phone, or it could be on the screen, or it could be wherever, So yeah, I think so. And to me, the big difference is when you stand in front of the actual object, you're a little bit more in the position of the maker of that object. So I think you can make a little bit stronger connection to that sort of creative intent, or at least the experience of it. Whereas, we're blessed to have so much access to be able to see so much of this stuff from around the world, like never before has been the case. But that's no substitute really for just actually experiencing the things in person, to me anyway. But thanks.
So I had a question.
Okay.
What was your favorite tour, and what was your favorite museum that you went to?
My favorite tour was the trip up where I showed you the photographs of the waterfalls and up through the coastal mountains, up the gondola. But what about you?
I think my favorite tour was, what's the mountain called again?
Mount Royal?
Yeah, Mount Royal in Montreal. So before the tour happened, I ended up getting lost.
I was about to say, were you on that tour?
No, I met them halfway through the tour.
He made it right about in time for the photograph.
Yeah. Yeah, I got lost. I took a different direction and I got lost. Then I had to walk like 500 steps up this path up the mountain.
I think it speaks well of TeJordan that he's describing this as his favorite.
But yeah, walking on Mount Royal, I took a lot of pictures of like the city of Montreal. Got a really good view of the entire region. And we also learned about this railway that went up the mountain like years ago. Then they like closed it down after a while. But yeah, that was my favorite tour.
What was your favorite museum?
The Fit Museum. That's all.
I didn't answer that.
Maybe the one in Vancouver, the national one.
Oh, the one right across from our
Yeah,
the
from the
Vancouver
hotel.
Art Gallery. Yeah.
So, in that museum, there was like these giant abstract paintings from this one artist, and when I was looking at her description, I found she was from Trinidad. So, like being from the Caribbean, I was like, oh, someone's from the Caribbean is here.
Yeah.
And she also like traveled the world, so I was like really inspired by that.
I think mine was the McCord Stewart in Montreal, where we did the tour with. We went to a really. It was really difficult to tour topic. Content wise, but it was sort of again with this idea of reconciliation. This kind of like this series of documentaries about trauma of the past century in Native cultures, and like revisiting and interviews with like several generations from the same families in some cases, kind of talking about change, and it was accompanied by a collection of just like handmade kind of functional objects from the past 100 years of history from these different places as well. So it's kind of interesting to have this, and a lot of it you could actually handle. Like there were certain parts of it you could, which is not common in museums, but there were parts of them that were like, set aside for you to actually get to pick up and kind of experience, which I think was interesting. But you're picking people for questions now? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Go see the show, please, if you haven't yet.